In the top stories, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has told CARICOM that U.S. and the Caribbean security interests are intricately connected. Antigua and Barbuda is considering tougher rules to curb the surge in lost passports, and the U.S. and Iran have begun talks in Geneva in an effort to avert conflict in the region. Hello and welcome to the ZIZ Midday Major Newscast. Today is Thursday, 26th February, and I am Jasmine Thomas. First on the local scene, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with CARICOM leaders on Wednesday, signaling renewed U.S. engagement with the Caribbean. Addressing the plenary session of the 58th meeting of CARICOM heads of government at the St. Kitts Marriott Resort, Rubio identified security, energy and economic growth as shared priorities between Washington and the region. He told leaders the United States sees its stability and prosperity as closely linked to that of the Caribbean, adding that a safer region makes for a safer United States. On security, transnational criminal organizations were described as a major threat with reference to U.S. measures targeting gangs and other actors connected to the crisis in Haiti. Rubio also spoke about developments in Venezuela following the capture of Nicolas Maduro, saying Washington is shifting from stabilization to recovery and supporting future democratic elections and economic progress. Beyond the security, he emphasized energy cooperation and investment, noting the United States wants to partner with Caribbean countries on responsible energy development and economic diversification. The Secretary of State said his presence at the summit was a clear signal of the United States' commitment to the region. And Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda Gaston Brown says he is hopeful talks between CARICOM leaders and the United States will lead to a stronger relationship. His comments followed meetings between CARICOM leaders and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Wednesday.
Closer relations between the Caribbean and the United States. So we hope that this will be a reset, one in which there will be stronger relations, one in which the United States will understand the vulnerabilities of Caribbean countries, the needs of Caribbean countries, one in which they will work with us to address those vulnerabilities, while at the same time strengthening our common security interests and ensuring that this hemisphere remains a zone of peace. I know some people don't like to hear it, but that is what keeps us united, and that is what helps to fuel growth and development within the Caribbean region.
Antigua and Barbuda's leader also addressed the long-standing U.S. embargo on Cuba, saying he would like to see developments that improve conditions for the Cuban people.
If we're going to be honest, the United States is very brutal about having changes in Venezuela and Cuba, and we have to be pragmatic in all of our dealings. We're very small, vulnerable countries, and whereas there may be differences in terms of how we see these issues, one just has to be pragmatic and to get the best possible result. And certainly in the case of Cuba, one of the things that we want to see is some immediate humanitarian relief for the Cuban people. That is the primary objective at this point. In terms of let's say, political changes, the ideological changes that some may be trying to effect. I mean, I don't know that we have the power to stop it. And we just have to see what happens within the upcoming days and weeks. My understanding that certain negotiations are taking place, and it's not for us to be preemptive. We have to see where those discussions go. And again, to be very sensible and pragmatic about a long-lasting solution that is mutually acceptable to all.
Prime Minister Brown added that while it would be improper for CARICOM to issue a definitive statement on U.S.-Cuba relations, Antigua and Barbuda hopes for a resolution in the near term.
It is indeed correct that there are negotiations taking place between Cuba and the United States. Then for any definitive statement to be made at this time without having knowledge as to what those discussions entail, I think that will be fraught with danger. What we do know is that the current U.S. Sanctions, they are creating significant hardships to the Cuban people. And from a CARICOM standpoint, certainly from an Antiguan and Barbudan standpoint, we are very concerned and we would like to see some relief. If there could be some, let's say, reduction of those stringent measures to bring some relief to the Cuban people as soon as possible. It is
Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown. Acting Commander of the St. Kitts and Nevis Defense Force, Major Coyote Sutton, represented the Federation at the inaugural Western Hemisphere Chiefs of Defense Conference in Washington, D.C. from the 10th to the 11th of February. The meeting, hosted by the United States Department of Defense and chaired by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, brought together military leaders from 34 countries across the Americas and Europe. Their discussions focused on shared security concerns, including transnational crime, terrorism, cyber threats, and other challenges affecting regional stability. Defense leaders also examined ways to strengthen partnerships, improve intelligence sharing, and coordinate responses to emerging threats. Officials say the Federation's participation highlights the Defense Force's commitment to regional cooperation and collective security, as well as its role in promoting peace and stability across the hemisphere. We now turn to regional news. The government of Antigua and Barbuda is reviewing tougher measures following a surge in reports of lost passports in early 2026. Director General of Communications, Maurice Merchant, said this week that dozens of citizens reported missing passports during the first weeks of the year. While most cases involve misplacement rather than theft of the document, each report requires a formal police report and an immigration investigation. The passport is also cancelled in national systems to prevent fraud. Antiguan and Barbudan authorities warned that lost passports can be used for identity theft or other criminal activity. Even when there is no misuse, the response places a strain on public resources and creates additional costs. Cabinet signaled that it is now considering proposals to reduce the number of lost passports that could include higher replacement fees and longer waiting periods. And Trinidad and Tobago police seized marijuana with an estimated street value of $102 million during a coordinated anti-narcotics operation in the Central Division last week. Investigators are looking into possible links to a South American criminal network, as well as the role of local businesses allegedly helping to launder money to pay the cartels in U.S. dollars. According to a senior police source, local businesses may receive a 10% commission for assisting in laundering payments. For example, laundering $500,000 in a week could earn them $50,000. The investigation is ongoing as authorities work to uncover the full scope of the operation and the networks involved. On the international scene, the United States and Iran have begun a third round of indirect talks in Geneva aimed at preventing further escalation over Iran's nuclear program. The discussions are being mediated by Oman's foreign minister. The talks come as President Donald Trump warned that the U.S. could launch military strikes if a new nuclear deal is not reached. U.S. officials are represented by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, while Iran's delegation is led by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. The negotiations are taking place against the backdrop of a major U.S. military buildup in the Middle East, including aircraft carriers and additional troops. Iran warned it will respond forcefully to any attack. Washington has long accused Iran of seeking to develop nuclear weapons. Iran maintains its program is for peaceful purposes and has stated it will never develop nuclear bombs. Key issues under discussion include uranium enrichment levels, Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium, and a possible lifting of sanctions that have impacted Iran's economy. Regional allies are watching closely, warning that any military action could trigger a wider conflict across the Middle East. Russia says it has handed over the remains of 1,000 soldiers to Ukraine while receiving the bodies of 35 Russian soldiers in return. The exchange comes as Ukraine's chief negotiator met U.S. envoys in Geneva to discuss economic plans for reconstruction after the war. Negotiators are also preparing a third round of U.S.-led talks aimed at ending the conflict, including participation from the Russian side. Hours before the Geneva talks, Russia launched 420 drones and 39 missiles across 6 regions of Ukraine, injuring dozens, according to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The body change is based on an agreement reached during negotiations in Istanbul in June of 2025, where both sides agreed to return up to 6,000 soldiers' remains, along with sick and heavily wounded prisoners of war and those under 25. Zelensky recently acknowledged that 55,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed, a number Western observers say is an underestimate. Russia's losses, based on public sources, are estimated at over 186,000, though the true figure is believed to be much higher. On the eve of the Geneva talks, President Zelensky spoke with former U.S. President Donald Trump, hoping the meeting would lead to a trilateral negotiations and ultimately talks at the leaders' level. Putin has refused to meet Zelensky, claiming he is illegitimate, citing Ukraine's inability to hold presidential elections under martial law imposed after the invasion. And now we take a look at the weather. Across the country, we are now experiencing cloudy conditions with a slight dust haze. Winds are moderate, coming from the east at 15 miles per hour. Seas are also moderate at 1.5 to 2.1 meters or 5 to 7 feet, with swells reaching 1.5 meters or 5 feet. As a result of these conditions, a high surf advisory remains in effect. As the day continues, conditions will remain partly cloudy and hazy, with periods of increased cloudiness and a 60% or moderate chance of brief passing showers. Tonight, meanwhile, will be fair to partly cloudy with hazy conditions initially, transitioning into brief cloudy periods with a 60% or moderate chance of passing showers overnight. Sunset this evening is set to be at approximately 20 minutes past 6, and the sun is expected to rise tomorrow at around 6:30. That brings us to the end of the Midday Major Newscast. Join us this evening for these stories and more. Thank you for tuning in. I am Jasmine Thomas. God bless you.